you want to see the truth, come with me." When Eva Callahan lifted her uniform, Admiral Lee saw the shrapnel fragments still embedded in her ribs. In that moment, he realized this wasn't just a war wound. This was evidence of betrayal. And what he learned that night would shake the foundations of the entire Navy. Welcome to Hidden Story, where we uncover the truth that powerful people want buried. Before we dive into this shocking story of military betrayal, classified cover-ups, and one officer's courage to expose it all, tell us in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between loyalty and truth? And if you believe stories like these deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us ensure they're never forgotten. The Grand Auditorium of the U.S. Naval Operations Command was packed to capacity. Rows of white uniforms sat in strict formation, brass buttons gleaming under the dome lights. The air carried the weight of pride and ceremony. At the front row sat Admiral Lee, a stern figure whose reputation stretched across oceans. His chest bore an intimidating lineup of ribbons and medals, each earned through blood, precision, and command. He was not easily impressed. Over decades of service, he had seen heroes rise and fall, stories bloom and fade. But today, his eyes were fixed on one name listed on the program, one he had heard spoken in hushed tones throughout Navy corridors. Lieutenant Eva Callahan. She was not what he expected. When her name was called, there was no roar of excitement, just a reverent hush. Every head turned. Eva stood from her seat in the third row, straight-backed and composed. Her face held no visible emotion, and her movements were precise, efficient. She did not scan the crowd or bask in the moment. Instead, she marched forward like it was another day on base, another standard protocol. The announcer's voice echoed across the auditorium, recounting fragments of a classified mission. Lieutenant Callahan is awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism during an operation in the South Pacific. He read from a prepared citation, one carefully sanitized for public ears. Words like bravery, initiative, and combat excellence floated out, but they felt too small for the weight Eva seemed to carry in her silence. The details of her mission remained classified, even 2 years after it had occurred. Rumors circulated among enlisted personnel, whispers of a brutal ambush, of teammates dragged from the jaws of death, of a lone woman who refused to be medevaced despite her own critical injuries. Most thought the stories were exaggerated. Some believed she had been protected by top brass, but no one doubted something unforgettable had happened. Admiral Lee watched her climb the steps with mechanical grace. Her posture was perfect, too perfect. Not the prideful kind seen in soldiers eager for recognition, but the kind honed from years of burying pain. She saluted with precision, eyes level, jaw clenched. He stood from his seat and approached her on stage. For a moment their eyes met, hers steely but sunken, his sharp and inquisitive. He shook her hand firmly and placed the medal against her uniform. The audience applauded, rising to their feet in waves. Cameras flashed, but Eva barely blinked. No tears, no smile, just a nod of acknowledgement. "Congratulations, Lieutenant," Lee said quietly. "Thank you, sir," she replied, voice low. He wanted to ask more, wanted to pull her aside and say what really happened out there. Why was she still carrying this weight like armor? But this was not the place. The ceremony rolled on. Other names were called, and Eva returned to her seat as though nothing had occurred. But the Admiral's curiosity did not fade. As the ceremony wrapped up, the crowd began to disperse. Officers mingled, reporters prepared their articles, families embraced their decorated sons and daughters. Yet Eva remained distant, exchanging a few polite words, always standing alone, as if some part of her still resided back in that jungle. Admiral Lee waited and made his way toward her. "Lieutenant Callahan," he said. She turned, saluting again. He returned the gesture. "Walk with me." She hesitated for just a second, but then followed him out of the hall and down a quiet corridor lined with portraits of fallen heroes. "You refused this medal once," Lee said, his voice even. "I did, sir," she replied. "Why accept it now?" She did not answer right away. Her eyes trailed over the framed photographs, so many young faces frozen in time. "I thought no one cared enough to ask why," she finally said. Lee stopped walking. Her tone was strange, not rebellious, not bitter, just exhausted. Someone who had carried something too long and had almost forgotten what it felt like to lay it down. "I read your file," he said, "but I know how files can lie." Eva's jaw tightened. "They don't lie, sir. They just leave things out." He watched her closely now, trying to read what the citations and reports had failed to capture. "I authorized that mission," he said. "I remember the details. Covert insertion, classified coordinates, intelligence indicated light resistance. You were leading a small recon squad." "You remember wrong," she said, voice soft but unwavering. Lee's brows furrowed. "How so?" She turned to face him fully, something raw flickering in her gaze. "We were sent into a trap, Admiral. We weren't supposed to come back." He was stunned by the conviction in her tone. "You think the mission was compromised?" "I don't think," she said. "I know." A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the distant hum of voices from the auditorium. Then she said something that caught him off guard. "If you really want to know why I didn't want the medal, you need to see what it actually cost." Lee's expression shifted. "What do you mean?" Eva stepped closer, eyes locked on his. "Not just in body, sir, in bone, in blood." And before he could respond, she looked over her shoulder, nodded toward a nearby security door, and said, "Come with me. I'll show you." The small briefing room was empty, white walls, a table, and 2 chairs. No surveillance, no interruptions. Admiral Marcus Lee entered cautiously, the door closing behind him with a soft metallic click. Lieutenant Eva Callahan stood at the far end, back turned, hands resting on the edge of the table. "I haven't been in this room since my debrief," she said quietly, eyes scanning the sterile walls. "Funny how places hold echoes." The Admiral remained silent. He was not sure what he was about to witness, but something told him it would change the way he viewed command forever. Eva turned around slowly and unbuttoned her dress blues with quiet defiance. Her undershirt clung tightly to her skin. With measured calm, she raised it just high enough to reveal the scarred landscape across her right side. Lee took a step forward, his breath catching in his throat. The scars were not clean or symmetrical. They were brutal, twisting lines of torn flesh and discoloration that told the story of torn muscle, fractured bone, and battlefield medicine done in the dirt. Just beneath her rib cage, 2 hard lumps pressed against her skin, fragments of metal still embedded after 2 years. Eva dropped the shirt back down and buttoned her uniform in silence. The Admiral sat down slowly. His hands trembled slightly. "Why didn't they take them out?" he finally asked, voice almost a whisper. "They're too close to the lung. Removing them risks puncturing it. I chose to leave them in." He stared at her. "You live with that every day?" She nodded. "They ache during storms, sometimes during PT. Most of the time I forget they're there until I see people clapping and giving me medals." Lee leaned back. The medals, the ceremony, the file, all of it felt hollow now. "I've seen combat injuries," he said slowly. "But that's different." "It's not just the scars," she replied, taking a seat across from him. "It's what came after." Eva looked him in the eye for the first time since they entered the room. "After the extraction, I woke up in Guam. No command debrief, no questions. Just a nurse, a promotion, and orders to rest." "You weren't interviewed?" Lee asked, eyebrows rising. "Only once, by a captain I'd never met. He asked 3 questions, then left. A week later I was being recommended for a Navy Cross." Lee clenched his jaw. "That's not protocol." "No, sir, it's damage control." Her words hit like a slap. The Admiral leaned forward, tension growing in his spine. "You're saying this was buried?" Eva nodded. "Because someone messed up badly, and they didn't want the story to get out." There was a long pause. Lee thought back to the orders, the satellite imagery, the mission green-lighted from his office. At the time, everything seemed routine. Quiet extraction, low risk, no red flags. "How did you know it was a setup?" he asked. "I didn't at first," she said. "But then I noticed the way the enemy moved, the way they boxed us in. They knew exactly where we'd land and when." Lee processed her words slowly. "Did you report your suspicions?" Eva smiled bitterly. "Who was I going to tell?" The man who signed the orders? That one cut deep. Eva continued, her voice steady despite the weight of memory. Operation High Torch. That's what they called it. Extract Dr. Thomas Vera, an American scientist kidnapped by insurgents near the Solomon Islands. It was supposed to be low profile, in and out, no firefight, no resistance. She paused, pressing her fingers against her side where the shrapnel remained. From the first step on the ground, something felt wrong. The humidity was choking, the air unusually silent, too still for an area supposedly crawling with guerrilla movement. My team of 5 moved deeper into the trees. Radio signals were clean, no chatter. The GPS beacon attached to the scientist's tracking device was moving, almost as if it was being carried. Lee listened intently as Eva described how the forest exploded with light and sound. A rain of bullets screamed from the tree line. Mines erupted beneath the soil. The jungle, moments before so still, was alive with death. Ambush, she said simply. My communications officer went down with a shot to the neck. Chaos swallowed everything. I scrambled toward the nearest injured man, Petty Officer Ruiz. Blood poured from a gash on his thigh. I dragged him behind a rock just as another blast ripped through the air, slamming my body into the ground. She touched her ribs again. Something sharp tore into my side, white-hot pain slicing through my ribs like a blade. I gasped but stayed conscious. I reached for Ruiz again, lifted him despite the searing agony, and moved. That was the beginning of a 3-mile journey that no one was supposed to survive, Eva continued. I don't remember most of the trek, only flashes, pulling one teammate then the next, my own blood soaking through my uniform, breathing so shallow I thought I might suffocate. At one point I had to bite my own sleeve to keep from screaming and giving away our location. The Admiral sat transfixed, watching this woman recount what sounded like an impossible feat of endurance. By dawn, I had somehow dragged 3 men, one unconscious, one sobbing, one barely breathing, to the edge of the extraction point. My arms were shaking. I dropped to one knee, vision blurred. A Navy SEAL medic approached and asked, "Jesus Christ, what happened?" All I could say was, "They're alive, take them." Then I blacked out. When I woke up in the hospital in Guam, my chest felt like it was wrapped in fire. Tubes in my nose, 4 in my arm. A nurse told me I was lucky to be alive. Internal bleeding, broken ribs, 2 fragments of shrapnel embedded too close to remove safely. She looked directly at Lee. The Navy wanted a statement. The press wanted interviews. Command wanted to parade me as the face of valor, but I refused them all. My commanding officer visited once, Eva said. He gave me a medal recommendation form and said, "Just sign. You've earned it." I looked him dead in the eyes and asked, "Who gave the mission orders?" He didn't respond. I tore up the form. Lee felt something cold settling in his stomach. What happened to the scientist? Eva's expression hardened. Dr. Thomas Vera was already dead when my team hit the ground. Had been for 3 days. The mission wasn't an extraction. It was a test run for a new satellite-guided targeting system. My team was the control variable. The words hit Lee like a physical blow. They used you. They sacrificed my team for a weapons test, Eva confirmed, and covered it up by painting me as a hero. They knew I'd survive, or hoped I wouldn't. Either way, they'd gain narrative control. Admiral Lee stood up and walked to the window. Below, civilians went about their day, blissfully unaware of what happened in jungles half a world away. "I've spent my career thinking I knew what sacrifice looked like," he said. "But I've never had to live with pieces of war inside my body. I gave orders. I trusted the system." He turned back to her. "You think there's still a leak in the command chain?" "I think there was," Eva said. "Whether they're still active, I don't know. But someone sent us into that jungle knowing we wouldn't come out." Lee nodded slowly. "I can open an internal review. Quietly. No promises on what I'll find, but I'll try." Eva stood. "That's all I ask." As she turned to leave, he stopped her. "One more question. Why keep serving after all this?" She gave him a small, tired smile. "Because the uniform didn't fail me. People did. And I'm not going to let them be the only ones wearing it." The next morning, Admiral Marcus Lee sat alone in his office, the file on Lieutenant Eva Callahan open in front of him. Dozens of pages, commendations, mission summaries, promotion records, lay neatly stacked, but none of them captured the woman he had met yesterday. She had turned the Navy's most prestigious ceremony into something deeply uncomfortable, not through protest or defiance, but through honesty, through scars that told the truth words could not. He picked up the phone and made a call to Naval Intelligence. I want a complete reevaluation of Operation High Torch. Pull internal communications from all levels prior to deployment, classified and unclassified. I'll sign the override myself. Within hours, his investigation had uncovered timestamp tampering, rerouted satellite data, and connections to a private defense contractor. The evidence Eva had described was all there, buried in classified files and sanitized reports. 3 weeks later, Eva was called to testify before a closed military tribunal. She stood in that same briefing room, but this time surrounded by senior officials, legal advisors, and investigators. Once again, she unbuttoned her uniform and revealed the scars that had started everything. "These are shrapnel wounds," she said to the assembled officers, "sustained during Operation High Torch. 2 fragments are still embedded in my body. The mission was compromised from the start. We were sent into an ambush to test experimental targeting systems, with my team as expendable test subjects." The tribunal's findings led to court-martial proceedings for 3 officers and the dissolution of contracts with the defense contractor involved. But more importantly, it led to policy changes that gave field commanders more autonomy to question and halt missions when intelligence seemed compromised. Eva was promoted to lieutenant commander and assigned to a new role, military ethics advisor. Her job was to review high-risk operations and ensure that what happened to her team would never happen again. 6 months later, she stood at the podium of the U.S. Naval Academy, addressing a room full of young cadets. She did not speak of glory or honor. Instead, she spoke of accountability. "You'll hear about sacrifice," she told them. "You'll hear about duty. But what they won't always tell you is how to survive what you lose, and how to speak when you're told to stay silent." She placed her hand over her side, where the shrapnel still rested. "This was meant to be forgotten, but it became the loudest part of my story. I stand here not because I was the strongest, but because I couldn't walk away knowing I had a voice others didn't. You won't always be believed, but speak anyway. The ones who matter will hear you." The applause that followed was not polite ceremony. It was recognition. Recognition of truth, of courage, and of the kind of leadership that emerges not from rank or medal, but from the willingness to bear witness to uncomfortable realities. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with others. Help us ensure these tales of institutional courage and moral leadership reach the people who need to hear them. Thank you for watching Hidden Story. We'll see you in the next story, where another truth waits to be uncovered, another voice waits to be heard, and another reminder awaits that real heroism sometimes means challenging the very system you serve.